Have you ever felt someone look at you as if they were silently reading your soul? Not just an ordinary look, but one that paralyzes you inside, as if they saw something within you that even you don't understand. It's a kind of connection that doesn't ask for permission. It goes right through, as if your soul were transmitting something, and for a second, someone else captured the message with absolute clarity. There are glances that touch the skin, others that reach the heart. But there are the rare ones, those that touch the soul. They don't ask for permission, they just happen. Like a mirror that for an instant becomes a window, an intimate portal between the invisible and the visible, a moment of rupture where time seems to pause, and something inside you feels read, scanned, understood on a level no words could reach. Most people look away, others hide their gaze. But when someone sustains that contact, something inside you awakens. It's not just shame, nor embarrassment. It's a warning, a kind of ancient discomfort that says, you are being seen. And not in the superficial sense of the word, but in an existential way, as if that gaze had transcended your history, your traumas, your disguises, and accessed something that predates even your memory, as if it were saying, I see what you hide even from yourself. I recognize the secret architecture of your essence. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who changed the way we understand the human psyche, believed that we all carry invisible patterns that guide us. He called them archetypes, deep structures rooted in the collective unconscious that shape our desires, fears, choices, and vocations. These archetypes are as old as humanity itself. They don't belong only to you, they are in all of us. But they manifest themselves in different ways, depending on the soul that carries them. And perhaps in certain cases, even in our gaze. And here's the idea almost no one dares to consider. What if your body weren't just a biological vessel, but also a symbolic one? What if certain physical characteristics were direct expressions of the archetype your soul assumed in this lifetime? What if, among all these expressions, the color of your eyes were the clearest and most overlooked sign of who you truly are? Imagine your eyes are a language. Not a language invented by humans, but something more primitive, something that speaks directly to the unconscious of others. Jung believed that symbolic language is the language of the soul, and if that's true, your eyes are speaking all the time, even when you're silent, especially when you're silent. The silent gaze is the cry of the untamed soul. You may have learned that eye color is determined by the amount of melanin, your parents' genetics, or random DNA combinations. But what we call random may just be the name we give to what we don't yet understand. Science explains the mechanism, but not the meaning. Jung was interested not only in how things work, but in the meaning behind them. And according to his most forgotten writings, there's a disturbing possibility that your eyes bear the visible mark of your inner archetype. Perhaps you've noticed something strange. People with similar eyes tend to make similar impressions. There's something about brown eyes that conveys warmth, something about blue eyes that penetrates like a blade, something about green eyes that disturbs and attracts at the same time, something about honey-colored eyes that changes depending on the other person's reflection. And have you ever wondered why this happens? Why does this frequency exist? This subtle pattern that spans generations and cultures? Jung taught us that everything profoundly human manifests itself through symbols, and that these symbols, even when not understood rationally, are understood by the soul. That's why you feel certain things when you meet certain gazes. It's not imagination, it's archetypal language. It's as if the psyche recognizes its own architecture reflected in the eyes of another, as if the pupils carried ancient messages deciphered only by unconscious sensitivity. Eyes aren't just organs, they're messages, they're echoes of the soul. They're bridges between the visible and the invisible. What if we were taught to listen with our eyes, to perceive the symbolic variations in each hue, to recognize the essence behind the surface? How many relationships would be more authentic? How many decisions would be made with more truth? How many paths would be avoided, or ultimately taken? Perhaps the reason you feel so out of place in this modern world is because it taught you to ignore all of this, to live based on external expectations, social standards, and shallow goals that have nothing to do with the inner calling that's always been with you. Life goes on, And that feeling that something is missing only grows. And the more you try to fit in, the more that emptiness expands. Because what's missing isn't something external. It's the reconnection with who you truly came to be. The problem isn't that you're lost. The problem is that you've been conditioned to seek outside what can only be found within. Jung said that what doesn't reach consciousness returns as destiny. And if you feel like your life has a destiny that hasn't yet been revealed, perhaps it's because you haven't yet brought to consciousness what has always been in your eyes. The mirror shows you the outside, but the gaze returns the inside. And this reflection isn't always comfortable. There are people who look at themselves in the mirror every day and see nothing beyond the surface. Color, shape, symmetry. But what if you looked differently? What if your eyes weren't just aesthetic details but clues, maps, resonances, the mute voice of the archetype you embody? What if every morning in front of the mirror were an opportunity to remember who you came to be? Have you ever noticed how certain looks stay with you for years? A stranger who crossed your path for 5 seconds, but left an impact that lasts decades. And why? Because in that instant your unconscious recognized something. As Jung described, we are affected by what reflects us, even if we can't name it. That stranger's gaze may have activated within you the echo of your own archetype, a silent reminder of who you are, of who you came to be, of who you still fear becoming. This question returns with force, like an inner knock impossible to ignore. Who are you meant to be? Not the social role you occupy, not the identity you've constructed, but the symbolic function your soul chose before you were born. Maybe you've never thought about it. Maybe you've felt it. A restlessness, an emptiness, a constant feeling of being out of place. This feeling isn't a defect. It's a sign. It's a calling that doesn't shout but insists. Think about everything you've experienced, the times you distanced yourself, the attempts to be what was expected of you, the silences you swallowed, the forgotten dreams. Think about everything you had to hide to adapt. Now ask yourself, how much of you still lives beneath all these layers? How many pieces of your truth lie dormant, waiting for you to return to retrieve them? Imagine if you had ignored all the signs, all the dreams, all the encounters that seemed strangely meaningful. Imagine if the world had managed to erase that silent voice that always whispers, "You're not living what you came to live." Now imagine there's a way to reconnect with that lost thread, and that thread is in your eyes. In the eyes you never learned to decipher. This first part is just the surface, the beginning of the journey. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming who one is, begins with an act of courage, facing oneself without masks. There is no mirror more brutal than one's own eyes. They do not lie. They do not disguise. They do not forget. They are portals, and it is in them that your mission begins. In the next part, we'll begin to reveal what each eye color symbolizes, not as a cheap horoscope, but as profound archetypes rooted in human history, and perhaps yours too. But before we continue, ask yourself, am I willing to see beyond appearances? Am I ready to remember what my soul has always known? If so, look in the mirror. Look deep inside. The calling has already begun. Have you ever noticed how certain people carry a specific kind of energy? Something almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore. No matter where they are, you sense something different about them. And this sensation often begins with their eyes, the way they look at you, the silence they carry in their gaze. Sometimes it's welcoming, other times intensity. Some looks comfort, others unsettle, some awaken. It's as if eyes are capable of invoking emotions that words can't grasp, a language that predates sound, more primitive and honest. Carl Jung believed that eyes are not just sensory organs, but windows to the archetypal patterns that inhabit us. According to him, every human being carries within them a set of symbolic forces that shape their behavior, their destiny, and their way of relating to the world. These forces, the archetypes, are universal, but their expression is unique to each individual. And the eyes, because of the way they capture and emit presence, can be the visible surface of these invisible forces. They not only reveal, they imprint. They not only reflect the other, but offer the essence itself in its raw state. Let's start with brown eyes. Maybe you were born with them. Maybe you know someone close to you who has them. Many consider them common. But this is an illusion of the modern world, which values the rare simply because it's uncommon, and ignores the depth of what is essential. Brown eyes represent the guardian archetype. They are the symbolic manifestation of those who came into the world to sustain, protect, and welcome. They are the eyes that convey stability, even in the midst of chaos. People with brown eyes are often the ones others run to when everything falls apart. They carry a silent wisdom, a kind of knowledge that comes not from books, but from lived experience. They are presence. They are roots. They are home. Think of that friend who always listens to everyone, who keeps secrets, who endures others' pain, who is rarely seen breaking down, even when the world around her is falling apart. Or that teacher who, despite their strictness, inspires security. Or even the grandmother who didn't talk much, but with a glance knew exactly how you were. This is the realm of brown eyes, the realm of earth, of rootedness, of ancestral protection. People with brown eyes are often connected to nature, healing, motherhood, and deep listening. They are the invisible pillars of families, groups, and communities. But Jung also warned us about the danger of living only in the shadow of the archetype. And the shadow of brown eyes is self-forgetfulness, excessive giving, difficulty setting limits, the tendency to carry burdens that aren't yours. Those with brown eyes often spend years caring for everyone else and neglecting their own soul, until one day, the body screams, or life takes its toll. And it's at this point that the archetype begins to manifest itself in distorted ways. Emotional addictions, abusive relationships, constant fatigue. All of this can be a sign that the mission is being lived out of balance. The guardian becomes a martyr. The nurturer becomes a prisoner of their own kindness. And the price of disconnecting from self is always high. Now think about blue eyes. They're almost always perceived as mesmerizing. There's something about them that penetrates, that investigates, that seems to see through words. Jung would associate them with the archetype of the visionary, the seeker of truth. People with blue eyes tend to have keen perception. They're analytical, intuitive. They know when something's wrong even if no one says anything. They capture micro-expressions. They sense discomfort that others ignore. And so they often become the ones who isolate themselves. Because they see too much. Because they feel too much. Because they know that the truth often hurts. Remember that coworker who seemed to guess what the boss really meant? Or that child with very light eyes who always seemed suspicious of everything, as if they knew more than they should? Or that person who in an argument hid exactly where it hurt most, not out of malice but out of instinct? Blue eyes see beyond the surface, and that can be a gift, but also a burden. Because seeing too much can also mean carrying more than you can express, because there isn't always a language for the truth you perceive. The shadow of this archetype is judgment, constant distrust, distance. Many people with blue eyes develop over the course of their lives a kind of involuntary cynicism. Because they see so much, they feel that no one is authentic, and they begin to protect themselves from the world, or try to control it. In some cases, they become cold, extremely rational, incapable of trusting anything they can't analyze. When this happens, the archetype ceases to be a bridge to truth and becomes a wall of silence, of irony, of distance. And the visionary becomes a prisoner of their own lucidity. Carl Jung said that consciousness only expands when we face the shadow. And that's why knowing your archetype is so important. Not to limit yourself to it, but to know how to integrate it. Living the archetype isn't about repeating patterns. It's about recognizing them, understanding them, and using them wisely. It's about knowing that the land of brown needs borders, and that the sky of blue needs ground. It's about knowing that the gifts we've been given also carry tests, and that the way we look at the world also reveals where we're still blind. And here comes something even more fascinating. When you understand the archetype that inhabits your eyes, you also begin to understand the kind of life that attracts you, and why. Brown eyes take pleasure in seeing others grow. Blue eyes, in revealing truths. But when these pleasures become obsessions, there's imbalance. The person who lives only to help others forgets to evolve. The one who lives only to seek truths ends up lost in theories. And both suffer silently because they know they're off-center. From the point of balance between giving and receiving, between seeing and welcoming. And then the question arises, what is your gaze saying to the world? Does it convey warmth, intensity, distance, care? Or does it convey weariness, isolation, or hardness? Our gaze is a direct reflection of our internal state. It carries messages we cannot control. It speaks before us. It reveals what we try to hide. It denounces what our voice silences. And that is why, for Jung, looking oneself in the eye was an exercise in courage, because no mask can resist one's own reflected truth. You can think of several everyday situations where this manifests itself. A recruiter looking you in the eye during an interview. A conversation with a friend where silence says more than any sentence. The moment you look in the mirror and feel something isn't right. These are all archetypal expressions in action. Symbolic language operating in real time. The soul trying to communicate through the body. The psyche seeking reconnection with its mission. Jung believed that true self-knowledge requires more than reflection. It requires courage. The courage to see what we avoid. To recognize when we're living on autopilot. When we let the archetype take over instead of living it consciously. Your eyes may have been designed by genetic code, but what they convey belongs to the soul. It's older than your biography, truer than your name, more revealing than any words. And perhaps now you'll start to remember certain moments. A random encounter where someone's gaze struck you. A story someone told with teary eyes. An animal that looked at you as if recognizing something in you. Small experiences you've never forgotten, but couldn't explain. Perhaps because, in that moment, two archetypes met and recognized each other. And in the silence of that encounter, something in you awakened. Something that had been dormant. Something you can no longer ignore. In the next section, we'll delve into green and honey-colored eyes, the rarest and most unpredictable archetypes. But before that, return to the mirror. Look closely and ask yourself truly, what have my eyes been telling the world without me realizing it? What stories do they carry? What truths still await revelation? The mirror is before you. The symbol is in your eyes. The journey is just beginning. Have you ever wondered why some people come into your life at turning points? As if they were silent catalysts for changes you hadn't planned, but that were somehow already ready to happen? There's something in their eyes that doesn't fit the mold. They don't explain, but they provoke. They don't comfort, but they instigate. And sometimes, without making any effort, they end up changing everything. Carl Jung would call these people living archetypes. Presences whose function is not to reinforce what already exists, but to destabilize what is old, obsolete, and stagnant. And in many of these cases, the entry point for these archetypal forces is the gaze, more specifically green eyes and hazel eyes. Rare statistically, but even rarer in essence. If brown eyes represent the earth and blue eyes represent the sky of consciousness, green eyes inhabit the borderland. They live at the intersection of form and transformation, between what already is and what is about to emerge. They are the bearers of the archetype of mutation, the soul of the alchemist, of the shaman, the kind that accelerates what you've been waiting for centuries. Green eyes almost never belong to neutral people. There's always something divisive about them. You can love them intensely or feel threatened by their presence, even without understanding why. This happens because the energy they carry acts on a level that goes beyond logic. They're not here to confirm the current narrative. They're here to shatter it. Have you ever been around someone who seemed to illuminate everything you were avoiding? Who, with a phrase, a gesture, or even silence, shattered certainties you'd held for years? People with green eyes tend to have this kind of effect. Not because they try hard to, but because the archetypal frequency they emanate clashes with what needs to change. Jung saw this kind of presence as a liminal force, one that lives between worlds, between phases, between identities. Green symbolizes the forest's threshold, the midpoint of the journey, the point at which the hero must decide whether to continue or turn back. And those who carry this frequency in their eyes are often the ones who push others into the necessary abyss of self-knowledge. But what happens to those who carry this archetype within themselves? What is the impact of being a constant catalyst for other people's processes? Of constantly accelerating transformations that aren't always yours? It's common for green-eyed people to report a feeling of not belonging. They're too much for some, too little for others. They never fit the mold. They grow up being told they're too intense, too complex, too mysterious. And they internalize this strangeness as a flaw, when in fact they're just vibrating at the frequency of transition. Have you ever felt like an outsider even among loved ones? Have you ever felt like you were only understood in fragments? As if only part of who you are was visible to the world? This is the dilemma of the green archetype, the mission to provoke the new, even when no one asked for it. The price of this can be high. Unstable relationships, friendships that end without explanation, environments that become uncomfortable for no apparent reason, because, in practice, their presence accelerates what's latent, and not everyone is ready to change. Many people prefer familiar pain to unknown transformation, and when someone enters their lives as a mirror of change, the most common reaction is to flee. Have you ever noticed how people with green eyes tend to have intense histories, abrupt changes, frequent new beginnings, periods of profound isolation? These are no coincidences. They are symptoms of an archetype in flux. The catalyst lacks stability because its mission is movement. And when it becomes fixed, the soul becomes ill. Carl Jung said that psychic life becomes ill when the archetype is denied or repressed. And in the case of green, repression often comes in the form of forced adaptation, the effort to be normal, to fit in, to be predictable. But green never will be. It came to interrupt cycles, to break familiar patterns, to bring the fertile chaos of renewal. And what about honey-colored eyes? Those that change with the light, the environment, the mood. They represent the archetype of the mirror, but not just any mirror, an archetypal mirror, capable of reflecting in others what is hidden even from oneself. A person with honey-colored eyes is often a symbolic chameleon, someone who transforms not out of insecurity, but out of a mission. Have you ever met someone who seems to be different for everyone? Who changes tone, energy, and function depending on the company? Who can navigate between opposing worlds with disconcerting ease? This is the archetype of the honey-colored eye. They live to reflect, to reveal, to adapt, and, in the process, transform. But there's a profound dilemma here, because reflecting others can mean forgetting oneself. The mirror person often doesn't know who they are when they're alone. They feel like their identity depends on context, role, and external perspective. And this can generate a silent identity crisis, because every mirror needs something to reflect. And when there's no one there, what's left? Jung warned of the risk of an excessive persona, that layer of adaptation we use to integrate ourselves into the world. When the persona dominates the self, the soul loses its voice. And the mirror archetype runs this risk of always living to be useful to others, of molding itself so much that it dilutes itself. Have you ever felt like you're many versions of yourself? Have you noticed how some people reveal sides of you you never knew existed? This can be beautiful and scary, because the more you change, the harder it is to know where the reflection ends and the real begins. The honey-colored eye archetype lives on this threshold. But there's also immense power here, the power to activate in another what lies dormant, to be the mirror that not only reveals, but awakens. These people have the gift of seeing potential, of looking at someone and seeing not what is, but what can be. And in doing so, they become portals, open doors to possible futures. Can you imagine the impact this has on relationships? Mirror people tend to be intensely loved, admired, idealized, but they can also be rejected, because no one is prepared to see themselves completely. And when someone shows this with a look, the reaction can be one of enchantment or fear. What happens when the mirror breaks? When the person with honey-colored eyes can no longer support all the versions of themselves? Often, collapse ensues, an identity crisis, the need for seclusion, the silence necessary to discover who they are without reflecting anyone else. Jung said that shadow integration is the moment we stop projecting, and the mirror needs this. It needs to stop being a screen for others and start seeing its own reflection. It needs to ask the question it's been dreading for years. Who am I when no one is watching? Maybe you have green eyes. Maybe your eyes change color. Maybe you're reading this and feeling like someone has finally verbalized what you've always known without knowing how to explain. Maybe you're remembering the times your presence caused reactions you didn't understand. The times you felt like you were too much, inadequate, alone. Not out of weakness, but out of intensity. And perhaps for the first time, you're considering that this intensity isn't a mistake. It's by design, that you didn't come to fit in. You came to reveal, to provoke, to be the spark that starts processes that others would never have the courage to begin alone. In the next part, we'll reveal what science has ignored about the link between physical patterns and archetypal functions. But for now, let's return to the starting point. You who carry in your eyes the map of a mission that is still unfolding. You who feel without knowing where it comes from. Who change without being able to avoid it. Who provoke without meaning to. You are necessary. And you are here for a reason. Your eyes have always known. Now perhaps you are beginning to remember. At some point in life, almost everyone feels like they're swimming against an invisible current. You try, you strive, you adapt. But still, something feels off. As if there's an internal route being ignored. A path your soul longs to follow, but which you, out of fear or conditioning, insist on avoiding. And often this distancing isn't conscious. It begins subtly, with small choices made to please, with silences at crucial moments, with the acceptance of roles that have nothing to do with your nature, until one day, you look at yourself and no longer recognize yourself. The feeling is of living someone else's life. Carl Jung said that the greatest suffering of human beings is living in discord with their own self. He saw the self as the organizing center of the psyche, not just a psychological identity, but the expression of the totality of being. When we distance ourselves from this inner core, our energy fragments, and this generates symptoms: causeless fatigue, chronic discouragement, anxiety, draining relationships, repetitive dreams, creative blocks. All of this can be a reflection of a stifled archetype. And here we come to an uncomfortable but necessary truth. Many of us were raised to deny who we are. School molds, culture restricts, family conditions. The system demands adaptation. From an early age, we learn that certain parts of ourselves are good and others should be hidden. And so we edit ourselves, eliminating traits, controlling impulses, erasing intensities, until our essence is buried under layers of other people's expectations. But what happens when an archetypal being lives in denial? What happens when a soul with eyes that reflect healing tries to live as if indifferent? When a person with a gaze of revelation insists on remaining superficial? Jung warned, what doesn't reach consciousness manifests as destiny. In other words, everything you repress rearranges itself in your life as a repetitive pattern. You attract situations that force you to face what you've avoided. You encounter people who project their shadows. You experience conflicts that try to bring you back to your original mission. Modern science is already beginning to find parallels with these ideas. Recent studies in epigenetics show that repressed emotions can alter the expression of our genes. Psychology research demonstrates that the disconnect between what we feel and what we express is directly linked to anxiety disorders and depression. In other words, it's not just poetic to say that denying your essence makes you sick. It's real. There's data, there's evidence, there are stories. Take Lara's story, for example. A 34-year-old woman with dark brown eyes known by everyone as the group's fortress. She was the one friends called when everything went wrong. She was the one who listened without interrupting. She offered balanced advice. She always welcomed. But inside, Lara felt a weariness no doctor could diagnose. Until, during a therapeutic process, she realized she'd never had internal permission to be vulnerable. She'd grown up learning that she needed to be strong, that she couldn't be a nuisance, that her role was to support. And when her body began to fail, it was the archetype demanding balance. The guardian was out of balance, and she needed to relearn how to support herself before she could support others. Or Tiago, with his intense blue eyes, who had a reputation for being cold at work. He always knew when someone was lying. He noticed details no one else saw. His intuition was accurate, but he used it as a weapon. He was tough, unable to open up. He lived on constant alert until he lost an important relationship because he couldn't trust. When he sought help, he discovered that his hypersensitivity had been distorted by years of learned distrust. The archetype of the visionary had become vigilant, and the healing began when he allowed himself to see himself as clearly as he saw others. Can you see the pattern? Every time we try to silence the archetype, it manifests itself in a distorted way, and life, with its symbolic intelligence, creates experiences that try to return us to our original path, not as punishment, but as reorientation. Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful events that seem coincidental but carry symbolic messages. How many times has something seemingly random shaken you more than it should have? A sentence, a dream, a glance, a memory. These moments aren't mere psyche noises. They're calls, invitations to reconnect, and most of them begin in the eyes. Because the eyes are the part of the body where the soul seems least protected, where truth escapes, where the mission still pulsates. Have you ever felt like your eyes were saying something your mouth couldn't quite express? Have you ever cried without knowing why? Have you ever felt someone's gaze pierce you as if reading parts of you yourself avoid touching? This is archetypal language in action, a symbolic field of communication that escapes conscious control. And that, for that very reason, is so true. There's something unsettling about the idea that our eyes might be revealing what we're trying to hide. But there's also something liberating, because if it's true that the soul expresses itself through the eyes, then all it takes is a little presence to begin listening. Just stop, look, feel, and little by little the hidden narrative begins to emerge. It's no coincidence that ancient traditions placed so much power in the gaze. The Egyptians saw the eyes as portals to the spiritual world. The Celts believed the eyes revealed the hidden gifts of the soul. In indigenous tribes, the shaman identified the mission of each member of the community by observing the brightness and focus of their gaze. And today, even though we've lost these practices, we feel, we know, we intuit. There's something about eyes that transcends the physical. And perhaps that's why they're so difficult to look at when we're in conflict. Because they confront us with what is, with what has always been, and with what we've stopped being. Jung said that healing begins the moment we become able to listen to what we avoid. And the truth is, your eyes are speaking to you all the time. You've just learned to ignore them. You've learned to give more weight to other people's opinions, external goals, and social recognition. Meanwhile, your eyes are still there, conveying who you are. And what you came to be is not small. It is not shallow. It is non-negotiable. It is profound, specific, irreplaceable. There is something that only you can deliver to the world. Not because you are better than anyone else, but because your archetypal combination is unique. The way you feel, perceive, communicate, relate. All of this forms a pattern that never repeats itself. And when you deny this standard, the world loses something, not just you, because your lack of authenticity affects the collective realm. We are all symbolic pieces of a larger puzzle. And when one piece tries to mold itself to fit where it doesn't belong, the whole suffers. Have you ever wondered how many opportunities you missed by trying to be what was expected of you? Have you ever wondered how many true connections you missed because you were too busy playing a role? How many times has your intuition been stifled by fear of appearing awkward, weak, or too sensitive? It's time to reclaim this, not in a rush, not with guilt, but with awareness, with presence, with the courage to look at yourself with the eyes of your soul, with the archetypal lens of someone who understands they're not here by chance. In the next part, we'll show how archetype integration changes the way you work, love, decide, and feel. But for now, just breathe and listen to what your eyes already know. Because the truth, your truth, has never stopped being there. It's just been waiting for you to look back at it. At some point in life, almost everyone realizes there's a chasm between who they are inside and who they show on the outside. It's as if there are two versions of us, the one the world sees and the one that pulses silently somewhere we can barely describe. And the wider this chasm grows, the harder it becomes to feel whole. This disconnect saps vitality, draining the joy of life, weakening the clarity of choices. The soul begins to cry out, but not always with words. It screams through fatigue, insomnia, and unexplained anguish. It tries to warn you that you're not living the life you came here to live. Carl Jung said that individuation is the process of becoming who you are. But how can you become who you are? If you've spent your entire life trying to be what others expected, how can you access the depth of your mission if you've learned to mold your energy to fit into environments that never recognized you? This is one of the great silent pains of modern life. Living under a name, a profession, an image, and still feeling like something essential is missing. Have you ever found yourself staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night, feeling like you're wasting time? Have you ever felt like your routine is made up of empty repetitions that lead nowhere? This isn't just a sign of stress or burnout. It could be the symbolic language of the soul trying to break through. It could be your archetype trying to take the place it's been denied for so long. When we talk about archetypes, we're not talking about fixed characters or spiritual labels. We're talking about living structures within the psyche that shape how we feel, think, act, and relate. They are invisible but active forces. And when an archetype is out of balance, everything around it begins to seem disorganized. The mind becomes confused. The body aches. Relationships lose their luster. Vocation becomes doubtful. Intuition becomes silent. And life becomes a sequence of failed attempts at control. What no one may have told you is that the origin of this disorganization may lie in your eyes, not in their aesthetics, but in the archetypal frequency your eyes express. Eye color isn't just a genetic trait. According to forgotten symbolic studies, it's a portal, a sign of how your soul communicates with the world. The eyes are the only part of the human body where the skin never renews itself. The same membrane you've carried since birth is still there today. Perhaps that's why they're the most direct mirror of your inner truth. They don't change to match your masks. They continue to reveal themselves. And this is where many people begin to realize something disturbing. That living outside the archetype is also living outside their own emotional health. Because the archetype is not an abstract concept. It's an organizing center of experience. When it's in the background, all of life revolves around what doesn't work. Jung said that the unconscious that isn't illuminated becomes destiny. What he meant is that if you don't understand what inhabits you, your life will be nothing more than an unconscious repetition of inherited patterns, old traumas, and other people's beliefs. But there's something even more important. You can change this, not overnight, not with magic formulas, but with presence, with listening, with brutal honesty. The journey back to self begins with recognizing your own symbols. Your eyes carry valuable clues. We've already talked about the archetypes of earth, sky, transition, and the mirror. But what happens when you start integrating these into your daily life? The world around you begins to react. People sense your presence differently. Synchronicity intensifies. You begin to notice that certain situations recur less frequently. Old conflicts fade. Your body responds with greater vitality. Your mind opens. Decisions become clearer. Not because everything becomes magical, but because the energy that was once used to maintain an image is now available for truly living. Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to live aligned with something greater, even when facing difficulties? It's as if they carry a quiet strength, a confidence that doesn't depend on results. These people often don't have perfect lives, but they have something more valuable than that: internal coherence. And coherence is the result of archetypal integration. When you live according to your internal structure, even obstacles become part of the narrative. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is meaningless. There are stories that illustrate this perfectly, like that of Marcos, a therapist who spent years trying to be rational and collected, even though he felt an inner calling to work with art and spirituality. His green eyes always caused strangeness. He hid them behind sunglasses. He thought he was too sensitive, that he was too emotional, until, after a panic attack, he decided to stop fighting himself. He left the traditional clinic. He began integrating art into his sessions. He used painting, poetry, meditation, and for the first time he felt like he was making sense. His symptoms disappeared, his clients flourished, his energy returned, all because he stopped resisting what his eyes had been announcing from the beginning. He was a catalyst, not a conventional analyst. Or like Louisa, a successful engineer with honey-colored eyes that changed hue with her mood. She was always called a chameleon. She excelled at everything but felt empty. In therapy, she realized she'd spent her entire life adapting. She was the ideal daughter, the exemplary employee, the supportive friend. But no one knew the real Louisa, not even her. Little by little, she allowed repressed parts of herself to surface. She admitted her love for music, writing, and spirituality. She made difficult choices. She lost people, but she found herself. Today, she works in human development, using her chameleon-like perspective to help others recognize their own reflections. These stories are no exception. They are examples of what happens when someone stops resisting their own symbol, when they stop fighting what they came to be. Jung said that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by becoming conscious of the darkness. And part of this darkness is the pain of having abandoned oneself to be accepted, of having betrayed one's soul to be included. Maybe you're experiencing this dilemma right now. Maybe you're tired of repeating the same cycles, of attracting the same challenges, of feeling that, no matter how hard you try, the feeling of emptiness won't go away. This doesn't mean you're broken. It means there's something inside you trying to emerge, something that's been silenced for too long, and perhaps it's manifesting itself through your eyes, your emotions, your dreams, your physical pain. Have you ever noticed how some parts of the body become more ill when we're emotionally disconnected? Studies in psychosomatics show that repressed emotions are directly correlated with respiratory, digestive, and muscular problems. The body speaks what the mouth keeps silent, and the eyes reveal what the soul screams. When you allow yourself to live from the archetype, the body responds too. Energy circulates again. Expression flows again. Eyes shine brighter. There's no single path to this, but there is a starting point. The decision to stop running from yourself, to stop justifying suffering as inevitable, to start listening more carefully, to observe patterns, to notice what repeats itself, and above all, to return to the mirror. Look deeply. Allow your eyes to speak, because they've been speaking all along. You just hadn't learned to listen. In the next part, we'll guide you through concrete practices to recognize your archetypal mission in your daily life. But for now, allow yourself to feel. You don't need to understand everything yet. You just need to start remembering, because your soul hasn't forgotten. Your eyes don't lie, and your path is still alive, waiting for you. There comes a time when you can no longer pretend you don't feel it, that you don't perceive it, that you don't hear it. A time when your body, soul, eyes, and silence have said all they needed to say. And now, the choice remains, to continue denying the call or finally answer it. And this call doesn't always come as a thunderclap. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it just throbs, like something on the verge of breaking. And yet, many prefer the comfort of denial to the risk of awakening. Everything you've heard so far wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It wasn't about curious information, nor about personality labels. It was about truth, about remembering something you've always known, but that the world taught you to forget. It was about facing the mirror, not to judge your appearance, but to rediscover your symbol. Because there is no greater wisdom than that which springs from within. When the noise dissolves and only the essential truth remains, you are a unique expression of something greater. And the way you look, feel, live, choose, and touch the world carries clues about that expression. Your eyes are emissaries of your essence. They've been speaking for you since the day you were born. They perceived truths even before you understood what you felt. And perhaps now is the time to start listening to them carefully, not just as a sensory organ, but as a soul compass. But what to do with all this? How to transform these revelations into something practical? How to move from the realm of insight to the realm of action? The answer isn't to change everything at once, but to change the quality of your presence, to begin living in alignment with who you are, even if for just a few minutes a day, even if you're still trembling, even if you're unsure of the path. The first step is conscious observation. For the next week, set aside 5 to 10 minutes a day to look into your own eyes in the mirror. Take your time, no expectations, just observe, breathe, and ask, what are my eyes trying to tell me today? It may seem too simple, but this exercise has the power to reopen forgotten channels between the rational mind and the symbolic soul. Because, in the silence of the mirror, the soul often speaks louder. As you do this, pay attention to your body's sensations. Emotionally, notice what surfaces. Do you feel sadness, guilt, relief, gratitude, fear? All of these responses are valid and they're all messages. If you can, write down what you feel. You're beginning to map your own archetypal language. Then, a more refined, more sensitive listening begins to emerge, more connected to what's essential within you. The second step is reconnecting with the repetitive patterns in your life. Grab a notebook and write about 3 moments that marked your journey. One when you felt deeply alive, another when you felt completely disconnected, and a third when something unexpectedly changed. Notice what these moments had in common. What patterns repeat? What symbols were present? Who were you there? What did your eyes see or not want to see? Repetitions are not accidents. They are called symbolic. From there, you begin to put together a symbolic plan of action. If you recognize the guardian archetype within yourself, how can you begin to care for yourself with the same dedication you care for others? If you're a visionary, how can you use your intuition not to protect yourself, but to build genuine bridges? If you're a catalyst, how can you accept that your presence transforms without needing to apologize for it? And if you're a mirror, how can you sustain your own identity even while reflecting others? The answers don't all emerge at once, but reveal themselves over time when the intention is authentic. None of this requires drastic changes to your routine, but it does require courage. The courage to be who you are, even when the world doesn't understand, even when your family doesn't approve, even when the results haven't arrived yet. Because living archetypically isn't about having a perfect life. It's about having a life with meaning, with coherence, with roots. A life in which even failures carry dignity. The third step is silence. In a noisy world, silence has become rare. But it's in silence that the soul speaks loudest. Set aside at least 1 moment a week to be in absolute silence. No screens, no music, no stimuli, just you with yourself. Take a deep breath and ask, what am I trying to avoid? What do I need to accept? What am I ready to release? In silence, you can hear what the noise has always drowned out, the clear sound of your intuition. These 3 practices, the mirror, writing, and silence, are key. If done with presence, they will begin to reveal what needs to emerge. And over time, you will notice subtle but powerful changes. Your gaze will gain more depth, your voice, more truth, your posture, more wholeness, and your presence, more magnetism. Because the soul, when respected, emanates something that no technique teaches. It pulsates with a frequency that attracts experiences compatible with who you truly are. But it's also important to remember that this is a process. There's no end point. There's a journey. There's integration. There's maturation. And you don't have to do it alone. Jung said that we are transformed in relationship. And part of that transformation happens when we allow ourselves to be seen, truly seen. When we stop presenting edited versions of ourselves and risk appearing as whole. So if at any time you feel you need support, seek it. If you feel like sharing, share it. If you feel something has touched you deeply, don't keep it to yourself. Knowledge only becomes wisdom when it is lived, and the symbol only comes to life when it is honored. Your soul doesn't want perfection. It wants presence. It wants truth. It wants wholeness. Now, one last question. If you had just 1 more year to live, would you continue living the way you do today? If the answer is no, something needs to change. And change begins with recognition, with reconnection, with the choice to stop running away and start remembering. Because every destiny begins with a small act of courage, looking within, even when it hurts. You're not here by chance. You didn't come across this video by chance. There's a part of you that already knows this, that already recognized something in this content, that perhaps is crying silently right now, not out of sadness, but out of relief, of reunion, of return, because somehow you saw yourself here. You saw your pain. You saw your power. You saw your story being told between the lines. And if something in you has moved, I ask you, don't ignore it. Honor it. Respect it. Begin. Even if it's slow. Even if you don't know where. Even if it seems small. Begin. Because with each step, life responds. Reality begins to reorganize itself around your truth. If this content touched your soul, if you felt there's something here that needs to continue, subscribe to the Deep Psyche channel now. This helps us keep this work alive. Like the video so it reaches more people. And if you feel like it, share your experience in the comments. You can do so anonymously if you prefer. This is a safe space for your truth. And sometimes, just the act of writing can heal something silently. Your eyes carry a mission, and the world needs what only you can offer. Now it's up to you. Are you ready to remember who you are?